Very good afternoon to everyone. Today's discussion would be basically about the ghettoization of Dalit experiences within the field of Indian academia. And for today's discussion, we have Professor N. Sukumar from the University of Delhi, who has done a colossal amount of work within this thematics. Now, before I delve any further, this would be one of our first interview experiences within the initiative of Awaz in Focus, which aims to introduce us to the varied perspectives shared by those who are initiating grassroots level changes in and across different communities in the region. And into people interviewed, they are varying from academic scholars to grassroots level activists and practitioners. So for our last month's issue, we were actually interviewing Dr. Seher Iqbal, who has done also a lot of work within the socioeconomic contours of Jammu and Kashmir. Um, Today's thematic, as I mentioned before, would be about the ghettoization of Dalit experiences within Indian academia. Now, before I delve any further, I'd probably ask Natasha, who can kickstart the conversation for today.
So just to carry on from what Sahil said, Azad Awaz is essentially an initiative between the Center for New Economic Studies and Paigam. And Paigam does its work with regards to marginalized communities. So they have the media section, and they also have researchers and initiatives which assist different marginalized groups. It's along them that we initiated Azad Awaz, and it's essentially a digital media station. And what we aim to do, as Sahil mentioned, was look at different issues from different perspectives.
Natasha and Shahil, if you allow me, first let me introduce the work which I'm giving that gives slightly, a background that on what strength, I mean, do I have to speak on. Though you introduced me that, I'm working on these areas. Before coming to the question, when I was in Hyderabad University, I studied in Hyderabad University, and I stayed in Hyderabad University for more than 10 years. All my higher education, masters, and also research I have done there. And that was the momentum when Mandal Commission was, the 91 and 93, that was the time when I entered into the university spaces. And it is very important to give you the background precisely because the way the Mandal Commission has divided the campuses, that is where exactly, you can see how polarization has become a major aspect in university spaces. So being part of the movement, the Mandal activism, I have seen how teachers divided, students divided, and also the disciplines, for example, pure social sciences are, where they are more into pro-Mandal agitation, and whereas sciences and, other professional courses, they have become anti-Mandal, groups. And also you see the background, the students who comes from various different backgrounds, and, so this is how we need to understand the university space. The first generation of scholars, especially, Dalits, they are, they prefer to be opted for humanities and social sciences precisely because, it is affordable. And also it is, considered as, okay, courses which will give them a sense of, reasoning, rationality, and also sense of some kind of, viable space in the university system where they can negotiate within the classroom space. There is a language question also, I'll come later on to that in your own questionnaire. So, so these first generation of Dalit students, they come to these courses, and then over a period of time, because of accessibility to the higher education, because Mandal Commission has benefited a lot towards to many groups, and that is how 1995, 96, that time, mid 90s, many students started coming in because, there was a sense of, educational awareness through the movement. For the higher education, there was a huge kind of, aspirations by these, first generation of scholars. And in the process, when I was student there, I have seen, I have experienced, and I also observed many things, but I never felt that, to pen it down, what exactly discrimination means, probably, I don't know. I mean, now I'm retrospecting or maybe going back and thinking that why, not now, but so when there was a student by name Senthil Kumar, who committed suicide. That's where, I wrote this paper, Living a Concept. It's not a journal, it's a title of the paper, which I have published in EPW. Before publishing that, I mean, I stayed in that hostel where he died. And what made me to write is a very important aspect. Then I will go to your question. So I hope I'm making some background. I'm not taking much time. So when I read the news, when I was told that, there was a student who died and his dead body was identified in the sense, I mean, after 48 hours. I mean, imagine in a mobile era where human relations are very, I mean, close and, where, I mean, 48 hours not able to whereabouts of a particular candidate, whether the lab mates or class or, the hostel mates or wing mates, no one bothered about, where is this boy? So that made me so bad that, is this the place where I come from? Is this the hostel where I stayed for 10 years? And, I mean, I felt that there is a complete collapse of human relations within the university system or hostel system. That made me to write this as a, just, I mean, as a story, locating myself as a subject. It's a kind of autoethnographic model which I have adopted. And I just went and presented in one college in Delhi University. And for your utter surprise, many people laughed on my face. Are, kya bol rahe sir? I mean, can I come in? Because in Hindi, this conversation happened. That's why I'm coming into Hindi. Are, kya bol rahe sir? Aap, aajkal is tarika se kaisa hoga? Nothing like that. You cannot romanticize so much so that, valorize, the victimhood. So, I mean, universities are modern institutions. Nothing can be like this, the way you are depicting. I felt so bad. I'm a social scientist and I'm trying to understand the problem of discrimination, or the as Shahil, and you people themed it out, ghettoization of university spaces. Then that day I decided that I need to come out with a substantial evidence, because for any research, you need an evidence, research-based evidence. If you tell, people will say, I'm constructing story, but it's not a story. Today, what I'm going to respond to all your questions is based on 600 students whom I have interviewed in 10 universities in this country over a period of time. All scheduled caste students. Scheduled tribe, I felt first in the beginning to take it as a sample, but I thought that methodologically, the caste question might not fit into that, domain, though reservations are being part of both scheduled caste and scheduled tribe. So I was suggested to take only scheduled caste as a sample. So based on this, I mean, I must thank ICSSR. I must acknowledge this study is basically sponsored by ICSSR. I took the study and I conducted in 2 phases. 5 state universities and 5 central universities, including, gender, women, keeping gender in the mind. And also the different regions, like, I mean, not much in Northeast region, which I felt that, okay, except Assam, there is not much caste in question in other states in Northeast. I should have been taken, but maybe in future I'll take. But, ranging from Patna to Banaras, to Delhi University, to JNU, to Mumbai, to Madras University, Pondicherry, Kerala, MG University, and Nagarjuna University, and Hyderabad University. This is how I studied 10 universities with a intense, I mean, like 550 entries in a questionnaire. It's not that a small, when I first time I did my study, it was a very small questionnaire. I felt that, no, this is not sufficient. So that's how in the second phase, I strengthened the questionnaire, incorporated many gaps which I found in my earlier study, and then I started doing this study. So the background, what I'm trying to give you is that then, of course, I mean, Rohit Vemula issue, happened. The second phase of my, in fact, when I first phase of my study, when I went, Rohit Vemula was alive, and his active politics in Hyderabad University was also, I mean, being observed. So the second phase is post Rohit Vemula. And also I tried to understand how is there any kind of, positive, aspects that one can see in the university system, or is there any change in the attitude of the faculty, attitude of the peer group? And I don't find anything. It has become more, the ghettoization has become more. So this is the background of my study, where I would be arguing from my side, So actually people, why I am giving you also is that, probably you people might be knowing, but, many people doesn't know that, I mean, how can, this really happen when we are talking about these, things. So I'm giving you with a strong source of evidence that this is how, the discrimination is happening, or the ghettoization is happening in university systems in the country.
So, Professor, the first question is, constitutional laws on education, in principle, with regards to affirmative action and reservations, attempt to bridge the gap between marginalized groups and those in the general category. Despite being implemented, there's a large gap between the numbers of students in the aforementioned groups. What are the social issues faced, especially by first-generation learners belonging to marginalized communities, in addition to academic issues?
Well, see, I mean, constitutionally, it is mandatory to implement reservation policy, and that is yet to be achieved. First of all, that is yet to be achieved 100%. What I mean to say is that, yes, there is an attempt to implement wherever there is an active voice in the university spaces, it is being strictly implemented. Wherever there is no active voice, even still the constitutional provisions of reservations into the educational sphere. And also I'm adding the recruitments, because I'm also being part of the larger, academia. So both, because, even after first gen, your also question, second question says that the outcome, so that is how I'm trying to connect, but I'll be going question by. So reservations are yet to be filled 100%, number one. Number two, the gap. The basic idea of providing reservation is to make other communities who are lagging behind so that they can come into the academic domains, they can get the spaces into the university system. And the others also need to be accepted, them as part of the institutional mechanism, or the socially, those social spaces need to accept the other communities also, so that the gap can be reduced. That, fraternity, the idea of fraternity through constitution, which certain policies can be, really made, achieved through that, but that has not been achieved. That has not been, I don't say that, I don't say, everybody is divided. No, there are certain spaces where people have acceptancy levels, and there are people progressively enough to accept these communities as part of the institution and as part of their inter and intrapersonal relationships, no doubt in that. But the idea of reservation in the name of merit, it is not that just only reservation. When the reservation came in, the merit comes in from as an alternative, engagement. That is a very important point, So when reservations are being, asked to implement in the institutions, the other, in the sense, the non-reserved communities within the university spaces, they started to devalue the reserved category students in the name of non-meritorious, or the merit, the merit and non-merit, debate. So that is how the purpose of, bridging the gap was not able to अरे ये लोग जो भी है किसी ना तरीके से इनको रिजर्वेशन से वो मिल ही जाता है. मतलब एक kind of tendency that these people have reservations, they will get it though they have merit or not, which is a myth. I am telling. Teaching in Delhi University for the past 19 years, providing opportunities, building confidence among these young children who comes from marginal background, especially Dalits, women, and also minorities. There is a why I am bringing all these categories together is it's not that only the Dalits are facing these problems. It's again women and also minorities, which I am not going to talk much about that. Our basic idea is to talk about the scheduled caste or Dalit students. So they are very meritorious. I'm telling, they are very Hindi medium students are very meritorious. One may say that, no, how can I say? I have many students in the classroom, in my classroom, though I am not from Hindi background, Hindi belt background, I speak broken Hindi. जिस तरीके से मैं क्लासरूम में पढ़ाता हूँ थोड़ा बहुत टूटा फूटा हिंदी बोलता हूँ, but फिर भी many students they opt my paper. Why all these things? I'll come later. So Hindi medium students also, I mean, given an opportunity, these who are these boys and girls who are from Hindi medium background? They're all, majority of them are scheduled castes. Majority of them are Dalit boys and girls, because of their there are many students even till today, those students who doesn't have their background, because all my 600 questionnaires, it speaks volumes about their family background. Their parents are still daily wage labor. They don't have employment. Even if they have, they are very petty jobs which they work. So how do we so all these I mean, these are the students who so there is no gap. There is the gap which has been aspired was not able to bridge. Second thing. And then the third one, the third point which has been raised in this questionnaire is that what are the social issues faced, especially by first generation learners belong to marginalized communities in addition to academic issues. Yeah. First, let me come to the academic issues, and I'll then go to the issues which are related to other than academic issues, like social issues, many other issues. The academic issues which I would like to highlight is that the moment they enter into the campuses, they don't have any kind of sense of belongingness, because the university spaces what are very modern and very hierarchical in nature. There won't be much receiving, because there is no any community consent. There will not be invited like other groups who are very socially organized. And these groups, wherever is active, like for example, in some universities, they have their own organizations who will say that, okay, there is an organization where you can go and approach them, so that they will give an academic help. Like they can suggest you which hostel is good, or which course. Suppose if some student wrote entrance in course, they select to opt for one, or if you want to cope up within the classroom, how do you get that support structure within the classroom? And you don't find any comfortable space in the classroom, precisely because there will be an elite, non-elite division within the classroom, number one. Number two, within the classroom, there will be a language, a kind of, divisions. And also there will be a kind of, caste divisions within the classroom, which many people say, no, that is not the case, but no, that's a fact. I mean, in a very practical sense, any relationship, whether it is university spaces, outside spaces, the moment we get introduced to other, we will look for the caste background of that particular person, which is a socially, a fact. But many in modern context, they don't agree. So the caste, elite, and the language, and the gender, because these boys and girls who come from the very poor background, they won't feel comfortable in interacting with the opposite gender, because of the language, confidence level, all these, issues. So from the classroom, settling themselves within the classroom with a lot of confidence level, they sit at the back. They may not sit in front. That maybe in one of my papers I wrote that I used to be a last bencher, because thinking that I might be asked questions by the teacher so that I cannot respond. So it's a kind of confidence level also makes them to sit at the back. So from beginning, from this to marking, the teacher, the way, before going to the marking, the way material, the academic material is available, it is purely available in English medium. And those who are not comfort with the English medium, our esteemed academic scholars, they believe in writing books only in English medium. They don't believe in writing books in regional medium, though they might be very comfortable. That's a different debate. So the books, knowledge, accessibility to resources will be very less, because those who are well acquainted with the academic language or academic spaces, they will acquire material and they will keep, and they will not share the knowledge, where these boys and girls will lag behind. So from confidence level to resources, academic resources availability, then they go with their limited resource to writing their exams. So writing their exam is like when they write exam with their limited knowledge or limited resources, whatever they get, they won't get marks. Even if there are brilliant students who study well and come, they won't get marks precisely because they will be deliberately, given less marks. I know that, a batchmate of mine who was an entrance topper in political science in Hyderabad University, who belongs to an SC, never become a gold medalist or never become a topper when it comes to the end of the course. So many students, those who are very bright, who cracks the entrance, comes to the classroom, but they will be given less marks in comparison with others. So this is how, within the classroom, at the end of the day, you will be struggling to get 55% or even 50%, which becomes a necessary requirement for teaching, for getting into the teaching positions. Because, 55 is a benchmark for unreserved, 50% is the benchmark for reserved, but, you keep on struggling to get that much percentage also. So within the classroom, these kind of academic problems like, resources, teaching, understanding, the level of understanding the lecture, the teacher, student interaction within the classroom, the teacher encouraging a particular students, the teacher discouraging particular students, So it's a game. It's a game. Like, there will be a continuous, who is providing much time. The teacher provides or giving much time to some students, not to other students. Of course, there is a gender discourse within this also, language. So if it is purely English medium teaching, again, these students, they face problems. So these are academic problems. Social problems that, from the day one, when there is a peer group, friends, I asked many of my respondents, 600 respondents, I asked a question that name 5 close friends of yours. Instantly, whoever comes in your mind, in my research questionnaire. So they said invariably majority of them are SCs, STs, OBCs, majority. 1 or 2 becomes the unreserved. The question is why is that the peer group within themselves, the friends, the friendship is happening between these groups itself? Because the level of comfortability, because they feel that, okay, to discuss my issues at the end of the day, first day or second day, or even after 1 week of the classroom experiences to share, I'll be comfortable to share with my own friends belongs to the same caste or belongs to the same class where I might feel comfortable, because the others might dismiss your idea. The others might laugh you. The others might say that, okay, these are all category students and they can't even understand the basic, concepts. So that is how the academic, thing is closely connected with the social relationship within the classroom. So how they're making friends themselves, that is one thing. And also your dressing pattern, your every your activity, like the classroom cultural activities, whether you are involved in that or not. Suppose if there is a freshers party, farewell parties, some kind of university spaces, there are a lot of cultural festivals, not only within the classroom, outside the classroom. So whether these people were being allowed, though they are more capable enough, they are not being very much encouraged into the non-academic activities within the classroom. And I'm putting it larger in the context of the campus also, that though they are capable enough, but they are not allowed, because there is a strong lobby that operates within the teacher and student lobbying within the classroom, that identify, okay, this is the student who will receive the guest. Suppose if there is a seminar, academic seminar, so who will receive the guests from airport, who will ask them to come on to the dais, who will introduce them, and who will be in charge of the food, who will be in charge of some other tying the banner, pasting the posters. So the division of labor also is clearly based on the background of the students. It might not be looking very deliberate, but at the back, the mind which operates is that, okay, this particular, there is a perception. Teachers say that, okay, these two bright students can be part of the reception or part of receiving the guests. No, the brightness or that, that subjective element of, good, clever, bright, who speaks good language. So this is how the non-academic, kind of discrimination happens within the classroom. Okay.
So in your understanding, how did the introduction of reservations cause a shift in the realm of academia? Now, whilst access to education increased, was there a shift when it came to the outcome? Did students belonging to these marginalized communities benefit greatly? Is such a feat rolling back from the last few years?
Well, I was going through the statistics for the past, 10 years, from 2011 to 2019. I'm not talking about even the last decade, 2000 to 2010. I'm not talking about that, because, that is also very interesting phase. If we look into the enrollments within the higher education by these, reserved category. Interestingly, there is a gradual increase in the enrollment ratio for the past one decade, though the previous decade was very slow, and this particular decade is very rapid. Rapid in the sense, there is a double in number over a period of time. If you see in 2010 or 11, the number, and if you see the number in 2019, the much recent statistics, there is a double in number. I have statistics also, but if you want, I can mail you. I would have really been good to explain with statistics. Anyway, and interestingly, there is an increase in women within the scheduled caste, enrollment of girls into the higher education, and more in North India, only not one state, Bihar, but in other states like Uttar Pradesh, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, all these states, there is an increase of women enrollments. Otherwise, there was a gap. There was a very considerable gap in the early of this decade, and that gap has how there is a massive demand for higher education from these groups, And then no doubt that there is a shift and there I mean, this reflects the aspirational level. When I asked all the students that, you know, why university and what is the purpose of the university for you, of all my sample, they said, you know, university education is necessary for us for to rationalize, to negotiate equality. Job employment comes much more later. So their idea of university, which is nothing but the university provides us a space where we can negotiate equality, we can write, we can read, we can express our opinion. All such things are very important aspects for them. So outcome. Shahil, if I'm not wrong, outcome in the context of employment, if you might be asking.
Yeah, Professor.
Yeah, okay. See, now in comparison with the previous decade and previous to previous decade, the outcome of present is becoming problematic. But the previous decade, there was a kind of, you know, positive outcomes was there, because there was a considerable good number size of students from this background who got employment into different educational institutions, different colleges. There was recruitment. What I mean to say is that the public institutions was still alive. There was recruitment policy. There was a pressure from the movement, Dalit movement, or you call it as, you know, I mean, whatever the movement, the outcome was visible. Like, you know, many first generation students who studied in higher education institutions, they were able to get some kind of job in some research institutions, university spaces, or NGOs for that matter, research organizations. Okay, so but now what is happening now with the disinvestment policy by the state, private institutions, you know, if you see over a period of 10 years or maybe, yeah, just 10 years, over a period of 10 years, in 2019, just, you know, 1.5 decade before, or maybe, yeah, 15 years before, the public universities was around 400 plus, 450 plus something. The private universities was very much less. It was only on lesser than 100. Now, if you see the statistics, moreover, the private universities and public universities are becoming equal. Now, what I mean to say here is that the more private universities are coming up, private institutions are coming up. So for this Dalits or the first generation of Dalits who are aspiring for jobs, they will remain in public institutions, but they cannot get into private institutions. So there is a very less viability of outcome for these first generation of learners becoming as teachers, becoming as, you know, I mean, medical and engineering, that's a different thing. But again, you know, the employment, if you look into Professor Thorat and Catherine Newman's work, Indian Institute of Dalit Studies, which conducted, they have conducted a very interesting study, sending created CVs to the private companies aspiring for job. The increasing privatization is blocking their outcomes. That is one thing. When it comes to the employment. Now, whether is there any outcome of reservations in total, that is also no, because lot of students, those who are taking admission into the higher educational institutions, they are not fulfilling. Only, I mean, they are not fulfilling, they are not going out with the degrees. Many of them are dropping down. Why? If you look into a study by, in 2019, I guess, you know, some organizations studied, it is there on the Google also, you people can Google that, the dropout rate in IITs. More, I mean, it's much pretty higher, 50%, around 50% of the students, those who took admission into the IITs, they are dropping down. They are not able to fulfill the entire, I mean, they are not able to complete the course. The reasons are different. Some may argue that they are getting some jobs. That's why they are dropping and they are leaving. And we all know pretty that the Thorat committee report, which has given a very detailed, maybe you can go back to Thorat committee report and read the AIMS report, which is a very interesting report on caste discrimination in professional institutions like AIMS. That is the reference to every study of caste discrimination. It is there on online also. So it mapped the problems of caste discrimination. So, they drop down precisely because the conducive atmosphere doesn't prevail. Why did Rohit Vemula killed himself? Precisely because it is not that he has fellowship, he has, knowledge, but he was, pushed to such an extent that he felt to kill himself for a particular broader cause, which I also don't. The politics of presence is important. That's a different debate. Now, the outcome, the dropouts within the higher education is pretty high in sciences, professional courses, and there are many courses where there are no takers of from this. For example, you take Indian Institute of Fashion Technology, or you take immunology. There are many courses where SC, ST students are not at all interested in going for. Though even if they are interested, in the sense, they doesn't know about these courses also. And if you see the statistics, higher education, which is available on net, that many courses, majority of the courses what? For, humanities, social sciences, engineering, medicine, commerce, masters, BA, BTech, BCom, but only these, and maybe to some extent law. Not all other courses. There are hundreds of courses which these students are not able to get in even till now. There are courses where zero of this particular background students are not able to have access. One. Number two, Vardhaman Mahavir Institute, 27 students at a time has been failed in Vardhaman Mahavir Institute. Balchandra Mungekar, who was an ex-MP, under his chairmanship, there was an inquiry that has been conducted. And in one of the institutes in Delhi, Vardhaman Mahavir Institute of Medical, or I mean, I'm not able to exactly recollect. 27 students at a time has been failed by all reserved category students. So what I mean to say is the outcome. The students who join, at least 50% of the students will drop down precisely because of the internal pressure, academic pressure. They will never be allowed to complete their courses. They will not be given supervisors at all, for that matter. Rohit Vemula was not given supervisor. Senthil Kumar was failed twice because though he has come out with a very his own entrance, he cleared entrance, he came, but the institution tested his language abilities, which is highly, and let me tell you that, the present right now in Pondicherry University, you go back to the Pondicherry University website and find the prospectus. You know what they say? See, the new ways of eliminating these categories, not to getting into the, I'll give you two classic examples, how the Brahminical mindset operates in the university system. When Rajiv Gandhi Fellowship has been introduced by Professor Thorat, I'll come, also there is a question that what are the facilities that has been provided. I'll come to that, but I'm giving you a context. The University of Hyderabad came out with a brilliant idea, and that has been adopted by the UGC, saying that this idea will weed out the Dalits. I'll give you the context. UGC JRF, Junior Research Fellowship, is awarded for the students who write exam, so that you will get JRF, Junior Research Fellowship. So Rajiv Gandhi Fellowship, you need to just apply through a proposal, and that proposal will be assessed by an expert in the UGC, so that whether you are eligible for this scholarship or not will be categorized. Now, the professors who are sitting in the university system who thinks that the Rajiv Gandhi Fellowship is not meritorious fellowship, and these people are coming out with just sending a proposal, and whereas the Junior Research Fellowship is the fellowship which is based on vigorous preparation and with examination. So they kept UGC as they make themselves UGC as the fellowship as the best. Now, how to prevent RG and Rajiv Gandhi Fellowship students? What they did, they came out with a brilliant idea called entrance test for PhD students. Now, every student, whoever gets JRF, whoever gets Rajiv Gandhi Fellowship, you have to come through entrance. You might be having fellowship. If you don't clear entrance, then there is no need of, you can't get into the university system. See, at one level, UGC introduced a fellowship called Rajiv Gandhi Fellowship for facilitating. Even that also, you need to get admission into some university. Okay. So, and now the Pondicherry University, what it says that the fellowships which are based on written test will be accepted direct admission. But whereas whoever the non-written test fellowship candidates who gets fellowship needs to come through entrance. You got the point? I mean, like the students who got through fellowship with written entrance, vigorous training, for them admission is okay, no problem. But whereas students who come from now the name is changed because again there is the politics, Rajiv Gandhi Fellowship is named to National Fellowship for Scheduled Castes because previously it was Congress and now it is BJP. Okay, that's a different thing. I'm not going to get into that. So, this is how the new ways that, institutions are coming out with new mechanisms to prevent these students. So fellowships becomes problem. Senthil Kumar committed suicide. His own batchmates, 4 of them dropped out. And I told you about Vardhaman Mahavir. So that means, the discriminating activities within the classroom and outside the classroom creates a sense of not belongingness. So, there is no much more support system, not much more. I mean, there is a little bit much more support, support system. I'll come later on. So this is how the outcome can be seen. Even outcome, students will be passed. Outcome, students will be just passed. Not with first class, not with, because they can't even see at one level, Ministry of Social Justice or Ministry of Social Justice Empowerment Ministry at central level, they are giving 100 fellowships for SC, STs to go abroad and study. Now, what is the qualification for that? You need to have at least first class. And if you are not giving first class in your studies in your classroom, that what is the purpose? One cannot use that fellowships. So at one level there are provisions that are being created for the sake of on the paper, but another level, to reach to that level, there are a lot of bottlenecks to these. Fellowships are a major constraint. I am telling. Out of 600 samples, 520 students approximately, they said whoever availed or out, or let me put it in this way, 85% of the students who are availing fellowship in my sample, they said that in their entire fellowship tenure, they faced problems in getting the fellowship, in sanctioning the fellowship. There are corruption issues. There are issues of delaying. There are issues of non-signing of the fellowship forms by the supervisors, XYZ. So the outcome is also problematic, not only in the context of employment, but also in the context of little bit outcomes, getting first class, availing fellowship, and then going abroad for a conference. You don't even get recommendation letters. Teachers, they don't even give recommendation letters to the students saying that you are not capable enough or you can't speak good English. Okay, and also they will have, okay, the only their assumption is that people who can go abroad with some fellowships or for some seminars can be brilliant within quotes, meritorious within quotes, which is a very problematic, things. Okay.
So, Professor, could you please elaborate on the work efforts undertaken by universities to help students belonging to marginalized groups, especially first generation learners? How often do you find such efforts to be implemented, or are they solely present to help with the image of such institutions? Instead, what measures do you personally believe should be implemented to help such students?
3 questions in this. Now, yes, there are a lot of efforts that has been undertaken by UGC over a period of time. If Thoret would have not been there, Professor Thoret would have not been there as a chairman of UGC. Whatever the positive undertakings, like for example, Rajiv Gandhi Fellowship, for example, remedial classes, that was his brainchild. Remedial classes for students in the university who doesn't have language capabilities, academic capabilities, how to write, how to read, how to, how to write, how to read, how to articulate, the remedial coaching classes was a very important component. But what happened in the process? That again, further stigmatized. What is called scheduled caste students are called in IITs as preppies. Preppy. Preppy means preparatory classes. In IIT, whether you ask, you don't ask, whether you require, you don't require, every Dalit student, every scheduled caste student is supposed to go to the preparatory classes. The student might be very brilliant. So they are called as preppies. Okay. And they are called as kotawalas. Kotawala. Kota children. Or they are called as, government brahmanas. These are the terms that are used against these, not only in IITs, but also in other, institutions like universities, So, with all these, reservations, because, reservations are providing them to get into these institutions. That is first provision that has been taken out by the constitution and by the UGC, MHRD. And then fellowships, scholarships. And then there are separate remedial coaching classes for scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, and, other marginal background students. And there are certain, merit cum means scholarships. Within that merit cum mean, you have all, like, scheduled caste students, they are being given special, like, post-matric scholarships. Post-matric scholarship is the biggest, backbone for students who are coming into the university system. In the undergraduate, courses, you get post-matric scholarship. Okay. So scholarships are very important, and that is very important for me. Every student, not only, Dalit student, I am telling, every student who deserves to get scholarship need to be given scholarship in higher education, because in the context of the contemporary situation, especially in public institutions, the state must give fellowships to the students, all the students, or especially the students who really require fellowships. Though required fellowship is much more for scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, backward castes, minorities, women. Why is that a master's student in Hyderabad University or some other places getting fellowship? Why is that the same master's students doesn't get fellowship in Delhi University? Now, the question is that, at least some kind of, see, if you have fellowship, there is no need to depend on your family, parents. There are many parents who doesn't want to educate their girl children. They can buy their own gadgets in the modern context. After this pandemic, what we are witnessing, that you need a mobile or you need a laptop to attend for classes, online classes, where, so fellowship plays a very important role. It gives them a sense of dignity. It gives them a sense of, empowerment. Yes, I have fellowship. For me, no need to go and ask money. You know what? Senthil Kumar, he used to support his family with his fellowship. When his fellowship was stopped, then only he committed suicide. So, you know, so these are the provisions that, you know, and that universities are has been created, or UGC has been created, and it can prevent dropouts also. It can prevent dropouts. But I am doubtful that with this new education policy, which he has facilitating dropout facility officially through, you know, different kind of, you know, entrepreneurial educational pattern. The new educational policy talks about, it has officially created a gateway for the marginal SC/ST students, you know, those who don't want to continue after +2, you know, they can drop out. We will give you a certificate. You go and start a small, you know, again, they want these students to go back and do their manual jobs. Instead of insisting them to, no, you must go to the top level. Instead of insisting them that you must attain PhD degree, you must become an engineer, you must become a doctor, the state is not bothered. Now, new educational policy has created a facility that if you cannot continue, you drop down. Dropping in the sense, we will give you a certificate, exit points. That is called in the new educational policy as multiple exit points. After +2, if you are not interested, or if conditions are not prevailing you to continue, you exit. We will give you a certificate. So you go back and you start washing clothes. You go back and you start, you know, doing, you know, pottery work. You go back and do your, you know, manual scavenging work. You go back and do your traditional jobs which you used to do. See, this is what, I mean, it is precisely believing. I mean, I have very lot of reservations with this new educational policy. Anyway, so the new educational policy has legitimized, or you can officially legitimize, dropout policy. I call it as new exclusion policy, not new education policy. That's a different thing. There are policies, yes, remedial coaching policies were there, but not effectively implemented, not monitored properly. And then, see, can you believe in after post Rohit Vemula, even before post Rohit Vemula, if you go back to UGC website and if you find 2012 guidelines, you can Google, you will get it. 2012 guidelines on caste discrimination. There is a policy that has been, guidelines has been issued by the UGC to different universities to ensure that equity will be guaranteed, to ensure that there will be there won't be any kind of discrimination in university spaces. In that process, they have to submit a report every year to the UGC that these are the complaints, these are the action taken report, these are the outcome. I have filed a RTI of all the 10 universities which I am studying. Hardly you will find, you know, 3 to 4, 3 universities which have couple of complaints, as if that discrimination doesn't exist. So discrimination officer is supposed to be there in the university. Not discrimination officer, anti-discrimination officer. He or she are supposed to be in the university. SC/ST cell in the university. Grievance redressal mechanism in the university. Counseling centers in the university. All are there or on paper. But they are not functional. They are not functional. Why is that? Like ragging. Ragging is a criminal offense now. Even for that matter, gender sensitive, you know, that GS Cash. GS Cash is also being not accepted in JNU. That's a different thing. But even internal compliance, you know, committee, internal compliance committee, when it comes to sexual harassment or gender, this thing, it is also legally, you know, it is, you know, but why not discrimination? You need an act. What I mean to say, that all these things, you need an anti-discrimination act which is liable as per the law. You see what happened to Payal Tadvi. Payal Tadvi, again, you know, I mean, she was killed. And there are many, you know, with NEET exam, there are many students who are committing. NEET might come out with a very clean chit that no, we are not having any kind of problem. But NEET exam itself is really problematic for the Dalit students, SC/ST students. No? In Tamil Nadu, 3 to 4 students committed suicide last year. Today only I just downloaded one of the suicide note that has been written by one girl student. Since I'm working on one chapter on suicides, I'm just looking into all these aspects. Anyway, so what measures do I personally believe should be implemented to help? See, I am telling Natasha and Sahil, there is no need of any new method. Whatever is existing on the paper, 2011, 12 UGC guidelines on equity, on discrimination, if every university strictly follow, that itself is enough to address the problem of these questions. Number one. Number two, because lot of issues like fellowship, issues like giving less marks discrimination, and fellowships, discrimination in fellowships, not providing them spaces for conducting their own seminars, activities. There is an ideological battle between the universities now. So Dalit students are not given space to conduct seminars. Whereas the other students, whether it is right-wing students or any other, left-wing students, whoever is dominating, they are able to procure spaces. But Dalits, if they want to conduct their own seminars, they're not being given provided spaces by the university. So, what I mean to say, to address all the problems, grievances redressal mechanism need to be thoroughly, implemented. So that is where, SC, ST, see all these SC, ST cells, again, there will be a professor who will be from the reserved background, who will say yes, who will be a kind of, anguti chapne wala. Like, they will go and just, sign in front of university authorities. No, we are all universities, because as if that universities, spaces are, these ghettoized spaces. Let me reiterate that these spaces are ghettoized, I'm telling. Anyway, those SC/ST, cells are not functional. And anti-discrimination officers who might be not even knowing any idea about who might have not even read about this act, knowing about the discrimination, they are the people who are sitting on the chair. Can you believe Delhi University did not send the report, last year report, discrimination, that 2011 report, which is mandatory to send to UGC? They have not sent it. I know that because I have an RTA with me. So many universities, they don't even respect the institutional mechanisms which has been devised to address these problems. What is viability? Yes, you need to identify a committed people. And the university administration must be biased neutral, caste biased neutral, that they should be neutral when addressing these, issues and concerns.
Professor, in your journal, Living a Concept, Semiotics of Everyday Exclusion, you had mentioned about the excluders sharing a collective vision, whilst the excluded experiencing exclusion as an individual failure. Now, Professor, in your understanding, to what extent and how does this hamper the participation of certain marginalized groups in occupying social spaces?
Yes. See, look, in university spaces, the perpetuators of discrimination, they are very clear. From top to bottom. Top in the sense from Vice Chancellor to the lower administrative authorities, and then the teaching, non-teaching within the administration, they are all very clear how to prevent the reserved category students. I'm not saying that 100%. If I from Hyderabad University I came till here, means there are positive people within the system. There are certain still spaces to negotiate, teachers. There are some teachers, very good teachers, very good administrators, very good vice chancellors, very good registrars who really encourage. But campuses are very clear. The perpetuator of the excluders and the excluded. The excluders are very clear and clever. Yes, we should not allow them. and that operates. They are all organized. Suppose if any, see what happened with Rohit Vemula, what happened with Payal Tadvi, what happened with Bal Mukund in AIIMS, what happened with this young girl, Malayali girl in IIT Chennai, much recently, I forgot her name, and what happened to, all these, students who openly, wrote a letter and said that, and also, over a period of time, if you see, and the evidences are also being, submitted. The institutions comes with clear chit. The people who involved in that comes with a clear chit that nothing has been happened, as if that. So how organized? Even judiciary becomes part of it. Parliament becomes part of it. See how not only within the institution, the excluders within the institution and outside the institutions, they come together, they organized, they have a very organized systematic mechanism to operate. But whereas the excluded, they are battling, like they are divided. Caste, subcaste, region, language. I'm telling you, these are major concerns, no? Gender, हाँ वो तो हमारा नहीं है. मतलब अरे भाई कोई भी हो, यूनिवर्सिटी सिस्टम का अंदर कोई भी मर रहा है तो कोई भी स्टूडेंट, why not, students can come together and fight for justice. No, वो तो वो अपना नहीं है, वो दूसरा है. So see the the excluded, very few excluded, they are united, they're fighting, and that too with the present day social media impact, because social media is the only media which is helping them to fight out, I mean, like whether it is Payal Tadvi or Rohit Vemula or even when Bal Mukund was died, there was no any social media for that matter. So so the excluded are being divided or being not properly guided. Larger social movements need to guide, post Rohit Vemula, in many universities, Ambedkar Students Associations came up. Dalit Students Associations came up. Ambedkar Periyar study circles came out in IITs, where the spaces which we can't even imagine about such things. So what I mean to say here is that excluded or divided, the excluders are united. And that need to be seriously, taken by, seriously understood. And it's a failure of the excluded. Someone speaking from Delhi University, someone speaking from somewhere else is also a problematic. I think, Natasha, again, you need to create this thing because it's 10 minutes time. No issue. Because since I am working on this issue, I'm very passionate. So I will spend, no issues. Don't worry about that. Don't be apologetic. Now, so this, to what extent, how does this hamper the participation in certain margin? Yeah, because, the participation level will be very less because of this. See, can you believe that, I spoke to one student. In fact, some American institution want to interview me 15 days before I gave an interview. And they are looking into the people who are psychologically, in the sense, depression, who went into the depression of this discrimination. That was their major focus. So I was talking to one of Rohit Vemula's friend, best friend, who is a victim of depression now. So I was continuously, because I'm working on, I talked to him saying that, he said, look, I'm deeply into depression. I said, nothing, support structure is there. You must be, very confident. And he will come out from that. He said he's already he came out from that depression. But many students who experience this discrimination, they slip into they slip into depression. They don't tell. You need to map their psychological, trauma. They don't even interact because, see, suppose if their mess card is stopped, if their fellowship is not sanctioned by the government, by the supervisor, by the university, by the UGC, now what happens? They will live without food. They have to beg food in the hostel. I have seen, that's what I narrated in my paper. I have seen Dalit boys eating in the dining hall at one corner, after 10:30 in the night, at one corner, dogs and cats used to eat, and few Dalit students who are used to be as a, non-borders. These are the suffering narratives. So, over a period of time, you slip into depression, and then, in extreme cases, it will go to suicide. But in other cases, what happens? They will drop down. They will lose their confidence. A student who is supposed to get a gold medal will certainly, suppose if you failed this particular candidate twice, then you are finished. Your confidence level is gone. Your entire life is ruined. So, so this is how it hampers, and they will not be, suppose, a teacher insults you in a classroom based on your food habits, based on your dress, even the, peer group also, they behave with you because, you are from a quota background and you stink. Smell is a major problem in the classroom. And you are, my own classmates used to tease me. I can recollect that when I used to wear Hawaii chappal. If you don't know the etiquette, the language of etiquette, or, the appearance in the higher education institutions, you are insulted, you are humiliated. So, this hampers the participation. So once if you are insulted, you will not be part of the classroom debate. Once if you are not being the part of classroom debate, you can't be confident enough to present a paper. And once if you are that, you can't confident enough to face the interview. Once if you are facing the interview, you are deliberately asked certain questions which you cannot answer. Again, Viva is a major problem. You take statistics from JNU, which is a very progressive university. In Viva, MPhil, PhD, or even post, all kinds of Vivas, discrimination is rampant. Those who got 90% in their entrance exams, in their Viva, they got 2, they got 3. And in much recently in UPSC, I don't know whether how active you are in social media. Probably you people might be very active on social media. I have forwarded many times. In UPSC, ST candidates who got very good marks in their written, they got less marks in their Viva. And the non-reserved candidates who got less marks in the written, they got massive marks in the Viva. It is visible. It is there. So, so it hampers the participation, and, the social spaces are segregated. The social spaces are totally segregated, reserved, non-reserved, fellowships for few, seminars for few, all these things,
Professor, how does language act as an effective weapon to restrict the entry of Dalits and Adivasis into academic circles? To what extent does it create a sense of stigma against them?
Yes, language plays a very important role in the classroom. As a student and as a teacher, what I'm witnessing is that English elitism. Though I am for English medium, I have a different kind of, take on English language when it comes to as a Dalit, as a teacher in Delhi University, and as a South Indian. I have a 3 different stands on language question. As a South Indian, I don't want any language to be imposed on anybody, so that I am for regional language. But as a Dalit, I am for English medium precisely. If not English medium, I would have not been in Delhi University today, and I would have not been speaking so confidently with you. Though I was not so confident when I entered into my master's classroom in Hyderabad University in 1991. I was not confident. I was not at all a confident student if I look back. I was struggling to speak one sentence, full sentence in English when I joined in my master's. So what all I mean to say is that yes, language, and as a teacher in Delhi University, I want Hindi or any other regional medium language it need to be taught in the classroom. Because majority of your students are Hindi medium. But I want students to learn English medium also. That's a different debate. So language as English as a dominant language, that need to be deconstructed. This language prevents one of my students is doing PhD on the linguicism in Indian universities. How language, discriminates, how language, excludes, how language prevents. Language is a bottleneck for many of these Dalit students in the university spaces. And it stigmatizes them. Students, they move around with only people who speak, among them English medium speaking people, Hindi medium speaking people. Okay, so they move around, and it becomes a natural, tie-up. Language also is a kind of natural, inclination. So, but in the classroom, the purely, English medium teaching is also not good for these, background boys and girls. But saying that, I say that yes, these boys and girls are supposed to conquer the world. If you want to conquer the world, you need to know a language which really links everybody, which can make people to, share the ideas, exchange ideas, critical engagement, all these things where language plays a very important role. Otherwise, we will again live in like a frog in a well. You live in a particular place where you can't negotiate, you can't talk with any other people.
Professor Gopal Guru, in his work, How Egalitarian Are the Social Sciences in India, he talks about a sense of theoretical spoon feeding that is provided to certain groups, whilst the Dalit or the Adivasi experiences are relegated to raw empiricism. So in your own personal experience, would you agree with this insight? Should Dalit or Adivasis look at theory as a moral responsibility to act in order to grant respectability to their experiences that is otherwise usually circumcised by condescending theorists belonging to the so-called upper caste?
Gone through the article, not only Gopal Guru, but also Vivek Kumar. He also wrote about that, how sociology as a subject, how one can see sociology from the context of Dalit Bahujan perspective. And also he critically engaged with, the interpretation of sociology by the dominant caste communities. See, basically, whether theory is important or the experiences or empirical evidences, who constructs these theories, theoretical formulations? Who dominated the academic discourse for the past 7 decades in the country, in the higher educational spaces? Can we call only those theories as theories? And what is the legitimate claim that only these theories can be claimed as the theories? And let me introduce to you with one of a wonderful write-up by Thirumal, P. Thirumal. It came in this article came in EPW again in January. If you cannot procure, I'll send an email to you, this reading if you wish. And he tried to deconstruct the entire, pedagogy, university spaces. Very interestingly, he articulates how university spaces are highly Brahminical. That's the background. I'll send you exactly that title again. I'm still. But when it comes to the question of Gopal Guru, how egalitarian are social sciences are not at all egalitarian. Because the theories that who had access to knowledge for so many decades, the people who, can you believe, Delhi School of Sociology or Department of Sociology in Delhi University, they have in their syllabus, they have a topic on caste. In sociology, we need to teach caste. Conveniently, they have all scholars who worked on caste, but not Ambedkar. Okay, this is a classic example. Now, you take topmost, sociologists, Andre Bette, Deepankar Gupta. No, that's where, I'm still, I'm engaging with these scholars in my, right now, I'll be coming out with the, they also, talk about the idea of merit. At one point of time, Andre Bethe says that merit, it is reservations are diluting the merit. Highly problematic. So the social sciences are not at all egalitarian, precisely because the knowledge that has been constructed is highly Brahminical. Is not Dalit. See, there are many perspectives: liberal perspective, Marxist perspective, feminist perspective, or Hindutva perspective, or there are many. Cosmic vision in Indian political thought, which we teach. I teach. What is missing is Dalit Bojan perspective of the ideas. In sociology, Dalit Bojan perspective is missing. Even in political science, which is missing. I'll come to that later on. But now, so what I mean to say is that the knowledge, it is de-Brahminizing history, de-Brahminizing knowledge, de-Brahminizing theories is very important. What is this theory? After all, theory comes from an experience. So Dalit Bahujans are more experienced. The empirical Shudras. Shudras are empirical. They have rich empirical knowledge. That from this empirical knowledge only theories are coming out. Until unless you are not connected with the soil, empirically you are connected with the soil. You are an empirically, experienced personality. What Kancha Aileya talks in his post-Hindu India. The others who reads and theorizing inequality, theorizing caste, theorizing, you need to come out with your own experiences. Ambedkar's document, Waiting for My Visa. It is an experience which speaks volumes that how his bitterness against the Hindu caste system. So there, empirical Shudra is very important. Theoretical Brahmana, the dichotomy between theoretical Brahmana and empirical Shudra is no more lesser than theoretical Brahmana. Let me put it in this way. So what I mean to say, this empiricism, empirical experience will produce more, the concrete knowledge. That's what I say in the context of Corona. Everybody has become untouchable. A Brahmin also has become untouchable. And the problem of untouchability, now the Brahmin needs to understand with his or her empirical, the pain of untouchability, So you need to have that experience to theorize. So the empirical Shudras are more capable to theorize given an opportunity. You don't give opportunity to get into the classroom. Can you believe a senior colleague of mine, a professor of mine, when my EPW paper came out, the paper which I sent it to you, it took 8 years for me to produce a paper because I never had a godfather in my academic background. I never knew how to write a paper. But this has made me a celebrity in academics, especially in, whoever is working on discrimination. This paper has been quoted by n number of, scholars. Around 25 to 30 works has been quoted. I'm not self-valorizing here. What I mean to say here is that, after all, your theories are constructed by our knowledge, with our experiences. You go to the field, you talk to our people, our sufferings, and you theorize it, and you become, theoretical Brahmana, and you have value in academics. But whereas those who are part of empiricism, their value is not valued in academics, which is highly problematic. So that is why Kancha Aileya reversed the order. He said, if barber is not there, you cannot shave you. If your pottery maker is not there, you can't cook. He reversed in post-Hindu India. He says he's from the top, he argues about the caste system. If the other is not there, you will collapse. Your entire system will collapse. Suppose if all these caste communities are not there, the village system will collapse, the urban system will collapse. So this empirical knowledge is necessary, and I don't place theoretical Brahmanical knowledge as superior. I dismiss. I am a social scientist. I have courage to dismiss it. Because and this is what, the senior professor, I'm sorry, I forgot to tell the entire thing. So when this paper came out, this senior professor, what this professor said, by hearing that my paper came in EPW, oh, see the language. Oh, your paper has been published by EPW. Then with equal arrogance, because I want to be very arrogant with a theoretical Brahmana, I said, they have to survive. If they have to survive, they have to publish my article. No, then anyway. So, see how this theoretically, suppose, if I don't speak a jargon, if I don't speak, if I would have spoken in this interview, like, how equality can be theorized, how injustice is being, all these empirical Brahmanas who are talking about their theories, they till now in India, not even an original theory has come out over 7 decades of this, I can challenge that. Is there any scholar, is there any theoretical Brahmana who conceptualized any theory? They all copied from Western, European, many other, outside, sources. And they are talking about, the theory, which is more important. What kind of theory? Our empirical pains has been, taken and been interpreted, and they have become much more brilliant, the brilliancy. Anyway, so then, just a second. Should Dalit Adivasi look at theory as a moral responsibility to act in order to grant respect to? See, now, if you, it is not necessarily you need to follow the trap of these, theories. They have their own theories. They have their own understanding. They have their own methodology. Dalits have their own methodology. They have their own theories. They see now it is coming out. See, once upon a time there was no autobiographies. Once upon a time there was no any kind of experiences that has been documented. And there are many like probably you will take this as a series of initiatives. Like we have Roundtable India. There is a blog run by Kufir, and they are coming out with alternative writings. Many students are writing, many young scholars are writing. Okay, and these are documented. People are trying to understand now. People are trying to engage with these issues, and now in another 10-20 years, this is going to become a major concern. Dalit methodology, Dalit Bahujan perspective. All these things, so slowly things are, because the first generation of Dalit scholars entered and the others are forced to learn or forced to understand these issues now. So, for me, it is, we should not get into the trap of the theories, by the existing theories. And, one can come out with a wonderful, future, of documenting their own history. The history is yet to be documented. Once I was traveling in a train in Rajdhani, a Tamil Brahmin was sitting next to me. Obviously, I came to know through his name. So I was reading a book. This is very important to mention here. I was reading a book, De-Brahminizing History by Brajranjan Mani. So the moment he saw the title, he was very, become very conscious, and he said that, how can you de-Brahminize history? Then I said, knowledge is not somebody's dad's capital. Kisi ka baap ka jagiri nahi hai, gyan. So, so people are engaging now, so we will be keeping on continuously engaged with. Gail Longwet came out with a wonderful, work when it comes to interpreting the Dalit Bahujan utopias. I will come that in the next question, last question.
So the last question we have for now is, social science practices are deemed as undemocratic and self-serving to the interest of certain groups, often subscribing to a Brahminical pedagogue. In your own personal curriculum, you had introduced a thinker-based approach. Can you please talk about the idea behind this move and why it is important and how it faced a certain backlash?
Yes. And it is continuously being, one group dominated by other group, center dominated by left or left dominated academics. And whereas, Dalit Bahujan is yet to get into the space, whereas right wing is now dominating in the academic spaces. So academic spaces was even still considered as their own ideological, experimenting spaces. Experimenting ideologically, they are experimenting these spaces. Till now, the very convenient argument the right wing people they give is that left people dominated, Congress backed left people dominated, liberal people dominated. So they promoted Western values, Western kind of education, so that we want Indianized, Indian culture, Indianized education, whatever it may be. And for them it is undemocratic, and whatever they are following is democratic. For Dalit Bahujans, all these perspectives are undemocratic. Somewhere or other, they have their own prejudices. They never encouraged a critical, though left to I agree with partly towards to the left academic, but still they are also having problem. They never consider even still caste as a institution to be debated in the forefront, rather than they say class as an institution. Whereas right-wing forces, they are so much so that they want to appropriate all Dalit icons, but they doesn't want to be addressed the basic problems like untouchability, the caste question. So they're all self-serving interests. Pedagogy is a battleground now. You see that especially when it comes to I teach Indian political thought in Delhi University, and this is my post specialization. I am specialized in that. I did my PhD on Ambedkar. That's why I got this. I have been selected into this post. Now I'm the first Dalit who entered into political science department. Until now, there is no any other Dalit teacher apart ad hoc faculty. Ad hoc faculty is not a vocal or So I'm the only one for the past 19 years. Can you believe? Before that, there was no Dalit faculty. That means almost for 70 years, a single Dalit faculty in the department. This reflects the Brahminical, dominance. Brahminical, I am putting it in the context of ideology. Now, when I came first into the university, because my post-specialization is Indian political thought, when I looked into the syllabus, there was a thematic kind of, explorations. What is the problem with thematic exploration? In fact, I fought with my colleagues because you can conveniently exclude the thinkers whom you don't like. You can conveniently exclude perspectives which you are not inclined to. If you are against to Marxist thinkers, you will not teach Marxist thinkers. Maybe you will teach a Marxist thinker who are very, not so radical, but okay, iska chalta hai. Now, Nehru has become a major problem for right-wing fellows, right-wing people. And Savarkar was a major problem for, left-wing people at that point. See that battle, And in the process, they forgot Periyar. In the process, they forgot Periyar, they forgot Ambedkar, they forgot Tarabai Shinde, they forgot Jyotiba Phule, they forgot, Kabir. They forgot, Kanshiram, more contemporary, political science, person. Anyway, I'll come to that later on. So when I first came, and then I said no, because I was not given chance to make, to devise a question paper also in Delhi University. I fought no, nothing doing, because I am an expert and I need to, not a senior professor will do every time. I have every right to do, and I fought. And that is how I made the syllabus in the context of thinkers deliberately to ensure that Ambedkar need to be taught in the classroom, not for the sake of caste, but for the sake of equality, which every individual need to be experienced in this hierarchical society, especially in Indian context. I was not in the context of caste. Might be annihilation of caste, could be in the context of caste, but it speaks about the idea of perpetuating inequalities in Hindu society. I fought and I said that, look, you need to teach us. Otherwise, no medieval thought was at all, I mean, it was not at all part of the discourse. You don't want to teach any 800 years, Islamic rule in India, which is highly, very important for, to understand their perspective. You want to study only Manu, you want to study only, Nehru, you want to study only Gandhi, you want to study only Savarkar, but you don't want to study Ambedkar. So I introduced the paper. I made compulsory of this paper to read compulsory of all my students. Until today, it is compulsory. And that was my first pedagogical initiative in Delhi University. Then, with few colleagues, with few teachers, over a period of time, we introduced a paper, Understanding Ambedkar, for undergraduates. Of course, it is also the brainchild of many other Dalit teachers. And of course, since I was being in the department, they met and we all discussed, and then we said, yes, it is very important idea and we need to introduce this. And we introduced it. And that is the second best popular course in Delhi University today. Ministry of Social Justice Empowerment, UGC, they all came out with circulars once upon a time that all such kind of papers need to be introduced in all the universities. I mean, I don't have a copy of that. I lost it, somehow. But Ministry of Social Justice came out with a circular saying that this kind of courses need to be introduced. That was my second, pedagogical intervention. And number 3 and most important pedagogical intervention was that when, I mean, of course, now universities are, not someone's capital. No, universities are also not someone's capital. At one ideology dominated, one perspective dominated. Now, because of the politics, right wing is also dominating in many universities. So they want to teach their courses. Very good, absolute. I am very happy. I taught Savarkar, I taught Ambedkar in the classroom. I don't mind teaching, because as a teacher, I need to teach every thinker, understand, construct, deconstruct. With reason and rationality, not without reason and rationality. That is not the case. So the other colleagues who want to teach Hindu nationalism, culture. So then I thought, no, I mean, yes, good, you teach, but the antidote also is very important in the syllabus. So that is how I introduced Dalit Bahujan political thought as an optional paper in Department of Political Science. And currently, right now, in this semester also, I'm teaching. Couple of 3 years before this course was under fire, because Kancha Ailaya's readings are part of this course. Maybe you can Google in the scroll. I think I have given a long interview on this courses, and I also wrote many on this. If you want all my write-ups on pedagogy and discrimination, you go to roundtableindia.co.in. You will get all those my write-ups on this to add more interesting nuances to this interview. So, when I introduced this course, there was no any kind of opposition. No, because why? I am interested to know what is Hindu tradition thought or, Hindu nationalism. And at the same time, the other also, say students, we need to leave this to the students. We need to introduce different perspectives to the students. So I devised a course solely, and very less universities, these courses are there. And Dalit Bahujan political thought from Buddha to Kabir, Ravidas, and also they removed the title called political. That is also politics, as if that this thought doesn't have anything to do with political. When we sent the course, we sent it as Dalit Bahujan political thought, but in the topmost upper level meeting, they removed the word political. That's what I observed much recently. But now the title is Dalit Bahujan thought. Though it is political, everything is political. Poor fellows, they doesn't know who is teaching and who will teach and how they interpret. So from Buddha to Ravidas to Kabir to Phule to Periyar to Ambedkar to Kanshiram, and also we felt that it is necessary to have a women thinker. We brought Tarabai Shinde into this. So there was a lot of in the beginning, there was nothing. My colleagues are very good. I'm telling, though we have ideological differences, they're very supportive, and they said they never had any problem. As I never had any problem with them. You ideologically construct, deconstruct, that's a different matter. But the politics which made this paper, into the controversy, but still there was nothing like that. And my colleagues stood with me, and we are teaching this course. There was nothing much, happened later on. But in future, what I am thinking that I want to introduce a paper on women political thinkers, gender, which is missing a lot. And the gender perspective is missing, as Dalit perspective was missing in Indian political thought. Dalit Bahujan perspective was missing, because whomever you talk about, the non-violence, the Gandhi will comes in, not Buddha. So I want Buddha to be introduced as the person who introduced non-violence. I want education, Phule, not someone else, or who talks about many other issues, caste, not somebody else. So there is an alternative utopias, alternative vision, alternative thought, alternative ideas that need to be introduced, and that is how I see the difference, and it is very important in the classroom. I don't mind. I have all books of RSS in my cupboard. I read RSS. I read Organizer very regularly. I engage with the other ideology. And nothing wrong, because they have their own and I have my own this thing, and we need to engage with ideas. That is how society can be constructed, reconstructed, ideas can be constructed, reconstructed, institutions can be democratized. At the end of the day, how do you, with the dialogue and deliberation, you can democratize the institutions. So this is how pedagogical issues comes in, and altogether this is what I feel that discrimination or ghettoization in the campuses are still prevailing. Otherwise, Payal Tadvi's issue would have been not happened. And otherwise, this young girl in IIT Madras, she would have been not, I'm sorry, I forgot the name, would have been not happened. And I'm sure that, what my alternative or my suggestion to the policymakers or even the state is that, look, for Dalits, for SCs, for scheduled castes, it is not so easy to survive in the university system or any IITs or IIC, Indian Institute of Sciences, medical institutes, professional course institutes. So, I think we need to be more humanitarian, or more, we need to respect the other as equal. We should not underestimate the knowledge or the merit of the other. So I think, institutions need to be democratized. There are good in institutions also. I am not saying everything is bad. I should not picturize that. But the purpose of the interview and also is to understand the ghettoization process in the university system. I felt that, okay, these are the issues that need to be highlighted, say whether it is scholarships, whether it is admission, whether it is recruitment. The bizarre thing is that, many, in Delhi University management, I had a long email conversation with the authorities that they are not at all convinced to conduct interviews very fairly. And I raised it, I questioned it, and finally they succeeded in not making me be part of that interview board. I don't care, but I will continuously raise the issues of discrimination in this system.
Just one last question. I think it is based on, you had mentioned Ambedkar towards the end, that there's a constant systematic pull towards trying to forget Ambedkar's thought from the Indian academia. And I just want to know, Professor, why is that? Because I come across various reports in the past also, where there's been a vandalization of Ambedkar's statue, like by the so-called Brahmins, whenever there's some issue raised in a particular town. So I just want to understand, why is Ambedkar trying to be forgotten systematically, both by the state and by the upper caste, so-called?
Well, see now, incidentally, from 1990s onwards, not even 1990s, I should thank RSS. I should thank RSS, which made Ambedkar as a major, debatable point among all the political classes. They tried to appropriate Ambedkar. The moment RSS tried to appropriate Ambedkar, which they cannot, and they can never. Probably they might, succeed in for their own political purpose, for the purpose of their ideological purpose, they cannot appropriate Ambedkar. And I wrote much recently about one of the RSS Pracharak who said that Ambedkar is the blue-eyed boy of RSS. I deconstructed that with the write-ups that Ambedkar came out. That is also published in Roundtable India. Okay, keeping that aside, why I thanked RSS, because when RSS tried to appropriate Ambedkar, left started appropriating Ambedkar. When left started appropriating Ambedkar, feminist scholars started appropriating Ambedkar. Never Ambedkar was so widely debated. When I came to Delhi University, I hardly used to see Ambedkar seminar on Ambedkar. And the government was forced to come out with circulars celebrating Ambedkar. Though it is for their own political purpose, everybody knows it. Everybody knows it. Okay, Samarastha, all this, language, which is, I'm well versed about that. The only thing is that, and in fact, they came out with a special issue on their organizer in 125 years of birth of Ambedkar. So, in that way, they made Ambedkar more viable in politics, but they don't want to accept Ambedkar as Ambedkar's ideas. They want Ambedkar as a political icon, and that is where, vandalizing statues, for them, Ambedkar itself is a threatening personality. I am sure that Shahil might have gone through the paper, you might have gone through that in the paper which I wrote, how Ambedkar portrait which I narrated about Hyderabad University, that we were struggling to. So a poster becomes problem, and Ambedkar becomes a dial to a ringing tone in Maharashtra. Ambedkar's ring tone in Maharashtra was become a threatening, and this young boy was killed by the Sanghis. You go back and you see that, a boy who was playing Ambedkar's ringtone was killed in Maharashtra. Now, what I mean to say is that all these people, they want Ambedkar for their political gains. They want Narayan Guru for their political gains. They want Ayyankali for their political gains. They want Rani Ganjalyu for their political gains. They want, but they cannot dare Periyar to own, I am telling. Not now, even after 100 years, they cannot own Periyar, because Periyar, I can consider, is the most radical thinker. So Ambedkar, when it comes to Ambedkar, Ambedkar is a very important thinker, not to understand only caste. The problem of history, again, the people who wrote history has done severe injustice to, or they are biased, including all perspectives, right, left, and center. All these history scholars who never placed Ambedkar as a philosopher, as a historian, as a person with all kinds of values, not just caste. Value of, or just, worked on caste question, gender, his idea of his idea of economics. His, when we introduced this course, let me also recollect that, in the committee of courses, I wrote about this also in Roundtable India, when the Kanchayalaya course readings has become controversy. Out of 3 hours, with the support of my colleagues, but out of 3 hours meeting, this only paper was debated for more than 2 hours. Why is that only Ambedkar? How Ambedkar can be considered as ism? All kinds of questions. Every question I was trying to counter. Every question I was trying to engage with the other few colleagues were there who were continuously supporting my initiative. So, ultimately, at the end of the day, after 2 hours, and the rest of the courses, many 20, 30 courses, passed. And when we brought Ambedkar into this mainstream course, Gandhi, they want Gandhi to be elevated to the world order. If you go to see how, they want a course to be introduced with Gandhi. I said, no, I will drop. They want Ambedkar to be taught with 2 more other. I said, nothing doing. I want Ambedkar to be taught as an independent thinker philosopher and not in the context of caste. Because caste is an vantage point one can understand, but even if you go and see the syllabus, it is the question of nationalism, it is the question of gender, it is the question of economics, it is the question of many other things, labor, political, and then comes caste. So, you know, Ambedkar for political purpose is being accepted. Ambedkar for academic purpose is never been accepted till today. If Ambedkar is accepted in total, there are remedies for not only the problems where universities are facing, but also for the entire outside society.
Thank you so much, Professor. It was a very extensive look into why things happen. It was great, actually. We got to know a lot more, especially since we don't actually look at the issue of caste extensively when it comes to our studies. So this is of great help to us. We have been introduced to it, but this completely puts it into a different perspective, and we're very thankful for that. So thank you for taking part in Awaaz in Focus.
So good luck, and I thank you very much for introducing to your, and maybe, you know, in future we can think about many other